Every generation thinks that it has either invented all the evils in the world or else has solved all the problems of the world. But a read through the Bible makes it clear that, as the saying goes, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Today's reading from the relatively obscure book of Ezra reminds us that when it comes to obstructing progress, we can't hold a candle to the people from that day and age. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, January 8th, 2022. Yesterday, we saw what an emotional event it was when the returning exiles got around to rebuilding the temple. From that passage, you'd think that the building progress would have moved ahead with all due speed. But a funny thing happened. Building stopped for many years. To understand why, we need to look at the circumstances of that day to see what happened. Here's the extremely condensed version. As I mentioned a few days ago, when the exiles began returning, there was friction between them and the people who had not been sent into exile but who had stayed in Israel. When the returning exiles began to work on the temple, the people who had remained in Israel came to volunteer to help in the rebuilding project. However, for whatever reason, the returning exiles refused their help. In retaliation for this rebuff, the people who had remained wrote a letter to the successor to Cyrus, accusing the returning exiles of nefarious purposes. The king, in turn, wrote a letter ordering that the rebuilding be stopped at once. As a result, work in fact did cease for many, many years. In time, however, that king, the one who had ordered a stop to the building project, died, and a new king ascended the Persian throne, a man named Darius. The former exiles saw in his rise an opening to restart the building project. They wrote the king and urged him to search the royal archives to see Cyrus's original command that they rebuild the temple. Darius read Cyrus's decree and as a result issued his own decree that the project be restarted, which is exactly what happened. As the book of Ezra reports, then, according to the word sent by King Darius, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-bozenai, and their associates did with all diligence what King Darius had ordered. So the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of the prophet Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo. They finished their building by command of the God of Israel and by decree of Cyrus, Darius, and King Artaxerxes of Persia. And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So what does all this have to do with us? Isn't this just a bunch of boring ancient history? What do we care, as long as the temple in fact got rebuilt? Two things, really. First, we think time begins and ends in our lifetimes. If something doesn't happen in our lifetime or according to our timeline, we think it will never happen. But in fact, things that happen in God's time may take more than one lifetime, many lifetimes even. Second, what we see as insurmountable barriers often end up being temporary detours. When King Artaxerxes decreed that the rebuilding of the temple should be halted, some people undoubtedly believed that that was the end of it. But it's clear that others took the long view, waiting for the day when a new king would take the throne, a king who might see the project in a more favorable light. And their patience paid off. In our lifetimes, you see, we're not called upon to change the world, to bring God's kingdom into being. We're called upon only to do our part. The great projects that God envisions take lifetimes of faithful people doing their little parts until one day the project is complete. I am reminded of how the great cathedrals of Europe were built. Often, a town would decide that they should build a great cathedral to God's glory. They would employ a master architect who would design the great structure, and then they would engage various kinds of artisans along the way as the need arose. Stonemasons, carpenters, basic laborers, and many others. And they would spend years adding to the great structure, which would often take decades, if not centuries, to complete. Rarely, if ever, did the people who first envisioned the building or the first laborers live to see the final product. They understood that there was great glory in not seeing the final product, but in offering their skills and talents along the way. And the fact that they themselves would never see the final product did not deter them in the least. You and I are part of a long line of faithful Christians who have been called upon to help in our own small way to build up God's kingdom on earth, just as the Jews were called upon to rebuild the temple. You and I will probably never see it finished, but we can take satisfaction in doing our part. When we return next week, we'll finally meet Ezra, after whom this book is named. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.